The galactic research station Kepler 442 floated in the endless void between star systems, its metallic hull gleaming under the distant light of three different suns. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching as the automated mining drones harvested rare minerals from a nearby asteroid field. She had been stationed here for 6 months, leading a joint human-alien research expedition that was supposed to revolutionize interstellar travel technology. What she hadn't expected was to be sharing quarters with Zephyr, a towering 8-foot-tall Corathan warrior scientist whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess and analytical minds. The Corathans were humanoid in appearance but distinctly alien. Their skin had a subtle blue-gray tint that shifted like liquid mercury in different lighting, and their eyes were large, multifaceted jewels that seemed to capture and reflect every photon of light around them. Zephyr's particular shade of blue reminded Sarah of Earth's deep ocean trenches, mysterious and captivating. The research station had been designed by a committee of different alien species, each contributing their own architectural preferences. What the designers hadn't accounted for was human sleeping habits. Most alien species either didn't sleep at all, entered hibernation cycles, or had communal rest periods. Humans were unique in requiring individual, private sleeping spaces for optimal rest and mental health. When the station's life support systems had malfunctioned 3 days ago, emergency protocols had kicked in. Non-essential sections were sealed off to conserve power and atmosphere. The crew quarters were among the first areas to be locked down, forcing everyone to relocate to the emergency shelters. These shelters had been designed with efficiency in mind, small, cramped spaces with basic life support and minimal amenities. Sarah found herself assigned to Emergency Shelter 7 Alpha with Zephyr. The space was barely large enough for one human, let alone a human and a Corathan. There was a single sleeping platform that had clearly been designed for someone much smaller than either of them, basic sanitation facilities, and a small workstation with a flickering holographic display. The first night had been awkward beyond measure. Sarah had insisted that Zephyr take the sleeping platform while she made do with the floor, using her emergency pack as a pillow. The Corathan had protested in his deep, resonant voice that carried harmonics impossible for human vocal cords to produce. His people valued honor and hospitality above all else, and allowing a colleague to sleep on the floor violated every principle he held dear. They had argued for an hour in the cramped space, their voices echoing off the metallic walls. Sarah had finally won by pulling rank. She was the mission commander, after all, but she could see the distress in Zephyr's multifaceted eyes every time he looked at her makeshift sleeping arrangement. The second night had been worse. Sarah had barely slept, her back aching from the hard floor, and she had been irritable and unfocused during their research sessions. They were working on breakthrough technology that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel, and her lack of sleep was affecting her ability to process complex mathematical equations and theoretical physics. Zephyr had noticed her declining performance immediately. The Corathans were natural observers, their multifaceted eyes capable of detecting minute changes in body language, posture, and even subtle variations in breathing patterns. He had tried to convince her to share the sleeping platform, explaining that Corathans generated very little body heat and took up less space when they entered their rest cycle. Sarah had refused, citing regulations about fraternization between species and the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. The truth was more complicated. She was attracted to Zephyr in ways that confused and frightened her. His alien nature should have created a barrier, but instead, she found herself drawn to his quiet intelligence, his dry sense of humor, and the way his eyes seemed to see straight through her professional facade to the person beneath. Now, on the third night, as emergency lighting cast strange shadows across their tiny shelter, Sarah was reaching her breaking point. She had managed perhaps 4 hours of sleep over the past 2 days, and tomorrow they were scheduled to present their preliminary findings to the Galactic Research Council. The presentation could determine the future of human participation in interstellar research programs. Zephyr was sitting cross-legged on the sleeping platform, his long legs folded beneath him in a position that would have been impossible for human anatomy. He was reviewing holographic data streams, his fingers dancing through the air as he manipulated complex three-dimensional models of quantum field interactions. The soft blue glow from the holograms reflected off his mercury skin, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. Commander Chen, his voice rumbled through the small space, carrying those impossible harmonics that seemed to resonate in her chest cavity. "You cannot continue like this. Your cognitive function has decreased by approximately 37% since yesterday. If you present our findings to the Council in this state, they will question not only our research but humanity's fitness for advanced scientific collaboration." Sarah looked up from where she was trying to arrange her emergency pack into something resembling a pillow. Her neck was already stiff, and she hadn't even tried to sleep yet. She knew he was right, the numbers didn't lie, and Corathans were incapable of exaggeration when it came to factual observations. "I'm fine," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "The presentation will go smoothly. I've given briefings under worse conditions." Zephyr's multifaceted eyes shifted, their jewel-like surfaces catching the emergency lighting and throwing prismatic patterns on the walls. "When you fought the Hegemon pirates near the Vega system?" Sarah paused. She had mentioned that battle once, weeks ago, during a casual conversation about their respective military experiences. She was surprised he remembered. "How did you, never mind?" "Yes, like that. You were injured in that engagement. Plasma burned to your left shoulder, if I recall your account correctly. You gave your briefing to Admiral Harrison while under the influence of military-grade painkillers and, with a significant injury. But, you were not suffering from chronic sleep deprivation at that time." He was right again. Sarah felt her professional composure beginning to crack. She was exhausted, frustrated, and more attracted to her alien colleague than she wanted to admit. The confined space was making everything worse. Every breath carried his scent, which reminded her somehow of rain on hot stone, and every movement brought them into closer proximity. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I appreciate your concern, but this is just how it has to be. Regulations exist for good reasons. Humans and Corathans working together is still experimental. We can't afford to give the Council any reasons to question the arrangement." Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still moving through the holographic data but with less focus than before. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more thoughtful. "Do you know why the Corathan High Command specifically requested that I be assigned to this mission?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the change in topic. "Your expertise in quantum field theory and your military background." "Same reasons they chose me, I assume." "Partially correct." Zephyr dismissed the holographic display with a gesture, and the shelter suddenly seemed darker, more intimate. "But there was another factor. Among my people, I am considered unusual. I have what you humans might call curiosity about other species. Most Corathans find aliens difficult to understand. We are taught that other species are inherently inferior, lacking the analytical capabilities and honor codes that define civilization." He paused, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "But I have always believed that diversity of thought leads to breakthrough discoveries. When I studied human scientific achievements, I was impressed by your species' ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems. You call it thinking outside the box, I believe." Sarah found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by his words. She had never heard a Corathan speak so openly about their cultural beliefs, especially the parts that weren't particularly flattering. The High Command knew that working with humans would require someone willing to challenge traditional Corathan thinking, Zephyr continued. "They chose me because I have spent years studying human behavior, trying to understand what makes your species so remarkably adaptable." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Zephyr's eyes shifted, their faceted surfaces seeming to look directly into her soul. "Humans excel because you are willing to be vulnerable with each other. You form emotional bonds that transcend logical analysis. You trust each other in ways that my people would consider foolish, and yet this trust allows you to achieve things that no single individual could accomplish alone." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither of them wanted to address directly. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, and she was certain that Zephyr's enhanced senses could detect the change in her breathing pattern. "Zephyr," she said quietly, "what are you trying to say?" He was silent for a moment, his long fingers tracing patterns in the air as if he were still manipulating holographic data. "I am trying to say that your regulations about maintaining professional distance may be preventing us from achieving our full potential as a research team. More immediately, I am trying to say that you need proper rest, and I need you to trust me enough to share this sleeping platform. Sarah felt her face flush. The confined space suddenly felt even smaller, the air thicker. It's not about trust. It's about propriety. About maintaining clear boundaries between species. Is it? Zephyr asked, and there was something in his harmonized voice that made her look up sharply. Or is it about fear? The question hit closer to home than Sarah wanted to admit. She was afraid of what sharing close quarters with Zephyr might lead to, afraid of compromising her command authority, afraid of the feelings she had been suppressing for weeks. I'm not afraid, she said, but the words came out weaker than she intended. Zephyr studied her with those impossible eyes, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her professional mask to the uncertainty beneath. Corathans were natural strategists, trained from childhood to analyze their opponents and identify weaknesses. But, when he spoke, his voice was gentle rather than tactical. Commander Chen, Sarah, you have been carrying the weight of this entire mission on your shoulders. You feel responsible not just for our research, but for the future of human-alien cooperation. You believe that any sign of weakness or impropriety will reflect poorly on your entire species. Each word was like a scalpel, cutting through her defenses with surgical precision. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the cramped quarters. That's a heavy burden, Zephyr continued. But it is not one you have to carry alone. We are partners in this research. More than that, we are. He paused, searching for the right word. Friends, I believe humans would say. The simple word carried unexpected weight. Sarah realized that he was right. Somewhere over the past 6 months, between late-night research sessions and shared meals and countless hours of conversation, they had become friends. The species barrier hadn't disappeared, but it had become less important than their mutual respect and growing affection. Zephyr, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this. Human protocols exist because we need structure, boundaries. Without them, we make mistakes. And, with them, you are making a different kind of mistake, he replied. You are so afraid of crossing a line that you cannot see when the line itself is the problem. He shifted on the sleeping platform, making room while keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. I am not suggesting anything improper. I am suggesting that two colleagues who trust each other can share sleeping space without compromising their professional relationship or their personal honor. Sarah stared at the offered space on the platform. It was barely wide enough for both of them, which would mean sleeping close together, sharing warmth and breath and the vulnerable unconsciousness of sleep. Every regulation she had ever learned said it was a bad idea. But Zephyr was right about one thing: she couldn't continue like this. Tomorrow's presentation was crucial, not just for their research but for the future of human participation in galactic scientific endeavors. If she failed because she was too exhausted to think clearly, she would be letting down not just herself but her entire species. If we do this, she said slowly, it stays between us. And it doesn't change anything about our professional relationship. Zephyr's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been amusement. Of course not. Although I should warn you that Corathans sleep very still and very quietly. You may find it disconcerting compared to human sleep partners. Sarah felt her face flush again. I wouldn't know. I don't usually have sleep partners. The admission slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. But Zephyr simply nodded as if she had shared a perfectly normal piece of information. That is understandable. Command positions require sacrifice. But tonight, you have a colleague who wishes to help you rest so that tomorrow you can represent both our species with the clarity and intelligence you are known for. There was something formal about the way he phrased it, as if he were making an official offer rather than a personal request. Sarah realized that this was probably his way of making the situation feel safer, more professional. He was giving her a framework that allowed her to accept help without feeling like she was crossing personal boundaries. All right, she said, standing up from her makeshift bed on the floor. But if this gets weird, I'm going back to sleeping on the deck. Define weird, Zephyr said, and Sarah could swear she heard humor in those resonant harmonics. You know what I mean. Actually, I do not. Corathan and human definitions of social awkwardness rarely align. Sarah couldn't help but smile at that. It was probably the most alien thing he had said all day, and somehow it made her feel better about the whole situation. They were different species with different social norms. What felt potentially inappropriate to her might be perfectly normal to him. She approached the sleeping platform cautiously, as if it might bite her. Zephyr had positioned himself against the wall, leaving the outer edge for her. It was a thoughtful arrangement. She would have an easy exit if she needed it, and he would be the one dealing with the cramped space against the wall. "Thank you," she said as she settled onto the platform. The surface was surprisingly comfortable, designed to adapt to different body types and sleeping positions. But it was also clearly sized for one person, which meant that she was pressed against Zephyr's side from shoulder to hip. "You are welcome," he replied, and his voice was so close that she could feel the vibrations in her chest. "Sleep well, Sarah." It was the first time he had used her first name without her rank, and the intimacy of it sent an unexpected shiver through her. She closed her eyes and tried to focus on her breathing, but she was acutely aware of every point of contact between their bodies. Zephyr had been right about Corathan's sleep habits. Within minutes, his breathing became so slow and regular that she might have thought he was in some kind of meditation rather than actual sleep. His body temperature was slightly cooler than human normal, but his presence was oddly comforting. The steady rhythm of his breathing and the faint, rain-on-stone scent of his skin began to lull her toward sleep. For the first time in 3 days, Sarah Chen felt herself beginning to relax. Tomorrow would bring challenges and presentations and the weight of representing her entire species to the Galactic Research Council. But tonight, she had a friend watching over her sleep, and that was enough. As consciousness faded, her last coherent thought was that maybe, sometimes, the regulations were wrong. Maybe trust was more important than protocol. Maybe vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength that humans could teach to the rest of the galaxy. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, her body finally getting the rest it desperately needed. And if she unconsciously moved closer to Zephyr's warmth during the night, neither of them mentioned it in the morning. Sarah woke to the soft chiming of the station's emergency lighting cycling to day mode. For the first time in 3 days, she felt genuinely rested. Her mind was clear, her body relaxed, and for a moment she couldn't remember why she had been so worried about sharing the sleeping platform. Then, she became aware of her current position and felt her face burn with embarrassment. Sometime during the night, she had rolled closer to Zephyr, and now she was pressed against his side with her arm draped across his chest and her head resting on his shoulder. His alien anatomy was different enough from human that the position wasn't entirely comfortable, but it wasn't unpleasant either. What was more embarrassing was that Zephyr was clearly awake. His breathing had changed from the deep, meditative rhythm of Corathan's sleep to something more alert, but he wasn't moving. He was simply lying still, presumably waiting for her to wake up and extract herself from the compromising position. Sarah carefully lifted her head and started to pull away, but Zephyr's voice stopped her. "Your sleep was much improved," he said, his harmonized voice pitched low so as not to startle her. "Your breathing patterns indicated deep, restorative rest cycles. This is good. How long have you been awake?" Sarah asked, still not quite brave enough to look at his face. "Approximately 43 minutes. Corathans require less sleep than humans, and I entered a light meditative state once my rest cycle was complete." Sarah finally pulled back and sat up, running her hands through her hair to try to restore some semblance of professional appearance. "Why didn't you wake me?" Zephyr sat up as well, his movements fluid and controlled. His multifaceted eyes caught the emergency lighting and through prismatic patterns on the shelter walls. "You needed the rest. And I found the experience educational." There was something in the way he said educational that made Sarah look at him more closely. "Educational how?" "Humans are more tactile than Corathans," he said, as if he were presenting research findings rather than discussing their sleeping arrangements. "Your species seeks physical comfort and contact in ways that mine does not. It is an interesting adaptation, one that likely contributes to your social bonding capabilities." Sarah wasn't sure if she was being studied like a lab specimen or if Zephyr was trying to make her feel better about the situation. Possibly both. "Right. Well, We should probably get ready for the presentation. Indeed. Zephyr stood and moved to the small workstation, calling up the holographic displays they would need for their presentation to the Galactic Research Council. I have reviewed our data during my meditative period. The quantum field resonance patterns we discovered could revolutionize faster-than-light travel, but only if we can convince the Council that the energy requirements are manageable. Sarah felt her professional focus snap back into place. This was what mattered, not awkward sleeping arrangements or confusing feelings about her alien colleague, but the breakthrough research that could change the course of galactic civilization. Their work over the past 6 months had focused on a theoretical problem that had stumped scientists across the galaxy for centuries. Faster-than-light travel was possible, but it required enormous amounts of energy and created dangerous instabilities in spacetime. Most FTL travel was limited to short jumps between established gate networks, making true exploration and expansion impossibly slow. But Sarah and Zephyr had discovered something remarkable in their analysis of quantum field interactions near the asteroid mining operation. There were natural resonance patterns in the quantum foam that, if properly harnessed, could reduce the energy requirements for FTL travel by several orders of magnitude. The discovery had been accidental at first. They had been studying the gravitational effects of the mining operation when Sarah noticed anomalous readings in the quantum field sensors. Most scientists would have dismissed them as equipment malfunction, but Zephyr had encouraged her to investigate further. The Corathan's analytical mind had been perfectly suited to mapping the complex mathematical relationships involved, while Sarah's human intuition had helped them understand the practical applications. Together, they had developed a theoretical framework that could make long-distance FTL travel not only possible but practical. But theory was one thing. Convincing the Galactic Research Council to fund full-scale testing was another matter entirely. The hegemony representatives will be our biggest challenge, Sarah said, reviewing the presentation notes on her personal datapad. They've invested heavily in the current gate network system. If our research proves viable, it could make their infrastructure obsolete. Zephyr nodded, his fingers dancing through holographic equations. The Vorthan delegation may also prove difficult. Their species has a natural distrust of theoretical physics that cannot be immediately applied to military applications. And the Crystalline Collective will want to see environmental impact studies that we haven't had time to complete, Sarah added. Sometimes I think the Council's diversity is more of a hindrance than a help. That is where human psychology may prove advantageous, Zephyr said, glancing at her with those multifaceted eyes. Your species excels at finding common ground between disparate groups. If anyone can convince a room full of alien skeptics to take a chance on unproven technology, it would be a human. Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his words, followed immediately by a stab of anxiety. No pressure at all. There is always pressure, Zephyr replied seriously. The question is whether we allow it to paralyze us or motivate us to exceed our previous limitations. Before Sarah could respond, the shelter's communication system crackled to life with an announcement from the station's AI. Attention all personnel. Emergency repairs to primary life support systems are complete. Normal station operations will resume in 6 hours. All research teams please report to briefing rooms for mission updates. Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that they would soon have their normal quarters back, and disappointment that their forced intimacy was coming to an end. The realization of her disappointment made her feel even more confused about her relationship with Zephyr. We should gather our presentation materials and head to the briefing room, she said, trying to focus on practical matters. Agreed. Zephyr began collapsing the holographic displays and transferring data to portable storage units. Sarah? The use of her first name made her look up. Yes? Thank you. For trusting me enough to share the sleeping platform. I know it violated your protocols. His formal tone made the words safe, professional, but there was something in his multifaceted eyes that suggested deeper meaning. Sarah found herself studying his alien features, the way the emergency lighting played across his mercury-tinted skin, the impossible geometry of his eyes, the subtle harmonics that made his voice resonate in her chest. Thank you for making it feel safe, she replied, and was surprised by how much she meant it. They gathered their materials in comfortable silence and made their way through the station's corridors toward the central briefing rooms. Other research teams were emerging from emergency shelters, and Sarah couldn't help but notice that everyone looked tired and slightly disheveled from the cramped living conditions. The exception was Dr. Vex, the hegemony's lead researcher, who somehow managed to look perfectly groomed despite having spent 3 days in an emergency shelter. The insectoid alien's chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the corridor lighting, and their compound eyes tracked Sarah and Zephyr's approach with undisguised interest. "Commander Chen, Researcher Zephyr," Dr. Vex said, their voice carrying the artificial harmonics of a universal translator. "I trust you weathered the emergency accommodations adequately?" There was something in the way Dr. Vex phrased the question that made Sarah suspicious. The hegemony was known for their extensive intelligence networks, and she wouldn't put it past them to monitor the emergency shelters for any signs of interspecies collaboration that might threaten their political interests. "We managed fine, thank you," Sarah replied neutrally. "I understand the Research Council is eager to review our preliminary findings?" Indeed, Dr. Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Though I confess some surprise that a human Corathan research team has produced results worthy of Council attention. Our two species have such different approaches to scientific methodology." The comment was clearly intended as an insult, suggesting that human and Corathan research methods were incompatible. Sarah felt her temper flare, but Zephyr spoke before she could respond. "Different approaches often produce unexpected insights," he said, his voice carrying those impossible harmonics with perfect calm. "The hegemony's own research successes have come from combining insectoid collective intelligence with individual analytical capabilities. Why should human intuition and Corathan logic be any less effective?" Dr. Vex's compound eyes fixed on Zephyr with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as surprise. Most aliens, even friendly ones, tended to dismiss human contributions to scientific research. Hearing a Corathan defend human capabilities was clearly unexpected. "An interesting perspective," Dr. Vex said carefully. "I look forward to your presentation." They moved past the hegemony delegation and continued toward the briefing rooms. Sarah waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "Thank you for defending human research methods. Most aliens think we're too chaotic and emotional for serious science." "Most aliens are wrong," Zephyr replied simply. "Human emotional responses provide valuable data about system interactions that pure logic often misses. Your reaction to the anomalous quantum field readings is a perfect example. A purely logical approach would have dismissed them as sensor error, but your emotional investment in understanding the unexpected led us to our breakthrough." Sarah felt that warm glow of pride again, stronger this time. Coming from a Corathan, whose species was renowned throughout the galaxy for their analytical capabilities, the praise meant more than she wanted to admit. They reached the briefing room to find it already filling with representatives from various species and research teams. The Galactic Research Council was an impressive sight, beings from across known space gathered in one room, their diverse physiologies accommodated by adaptive seating and atmospheric controls. The Vorthan delegation occupied one corner, their crystalline forms refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The Aquatic Federation representatives floated in specialized tanks, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent communication patterns. Even the energy beings from the Stellar Collective had manifested physical forms for the meeting, appearing as shifting columns of contained plasma. At the center of it all sat Council Prime, an ancient being whose species had been extinct for millennia but whose consciousness had been preserved in a quantum matrix. They were the neutral arbiter of galactic research, supposedly free from the political biases that influenced other council members. "Researcher teams, please take your positions for presentation review." Council Prime's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a direct neural interface that bypassed normal auditory processing. Sarah and Zephyr made their way to the presentation area, a circular platform surrounded by holographic projectors. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the attention of the entire council focused on them. This was the moment that would determine not just the future of their research, but humanity's continued participation in galactic scientific endeavors. "Present your findings," Council Prime commanded. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the holographic displays. Immediately, the air around them filled with complex three-dimensional models of quantum field interactions, mathematical equations that existed in 17 dimensions, and energy flow patterns that resembled living art. Honored council members, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. For 6 months, we have been studying quantum field interactions in the vicinity of asteroid mining operations. What we discovered could revolutionize faster-than-light travel throughout the galaxy. She gestured to the holographic displays, highlighting specific patterns in the quantum foam. These resonance signatures appear naturally in areas where gravitational fields interact with quantum fluctuations. By properly harnessing these resonances, we can reduce the energy requirements for FTL travel by a factor of 10,000. A murmur went through the chamber. Even for beings accustomed to advanced physics, the implications were staggering. Dr. Vex was the first to respond. These readings could be artifacts of your equipment. The quantum foam is notoriously difficult to measure accurately. We considered that possibility, Zephyr said, stepping forward to manipulate the holographic displays. Which is why we confirmed our results using 3 different measurement methodologies and cross-referenced them with historical data from 17 different mining operations. New displays appeared, showing consistent patterns across multiple datasets. The evidence was overwhelming, the effect was real, reproducible, and significant. The practical applications are obvious, Sarah continued. Instead of relying on expensive gate networks for long-distance travel, individual ships could make jumps across galactic distances using a fraction of current energy requirements. This technology could open up true galactic exploration and expansion. The Vorthan representative spoke next, their crystalline form ringing like wind chimes. What about military applications? This technology could destabilize the current balance of power. Any technology can be used for peaceful or military purposes, Sarah replied. But, the potential benefits far outweigh the risks. Faster, cheaper FTL travel could solve resource shortages, enable rapid disaster response, and bring isolated colonies into regular contact with galactic civilization. Furthermore, Zephyr added, the technology requires significant infrastructure to implement. It cannot be easily weaponized by rogue elements or terrorist organizations. The questions continued for over an hour, with council members probing every aspect of their research. Sarah found herself fielding inquiries about energy requirements, environmental impact, economic implications, and theoretical limitations. Each time she stumbled or hesitated, Zephyr was there with supporting data or clarifying explanations. They worked together seamlessly, their different perspectives and expertise combining to address every concern the council raised. Sarah's human intuition helped her understand the political and practical implications of their discovery, while Zephyr's analytical mind provided the rigorous mathematical framework that proved their theories were sound. Finally, Council Prime called for an end to questions. This council will deliberate on your findings, the ancient consciousness announced. You will be informed of our decision within 1 standard galactic day. As the council members filed out of the briefing room, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had done everything possible to present their research in the best light. Now they could only wait. That went well, Zephyr said as they gathered their presentation materials. Your responses to the political questions were particularly effective. I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah replied. When the crystalline collective started asking about 17-dimensional mathematics, I thought we were sunk. Human intuition and Corathan analysis, Zephyr said, those multifaceted eyes seeming to sparkle with satisfaction. As I said, different approaches can produce unexpected results. They made their way back toward the residential sections of the station, where normal quarters would soon be available again. Sarah found herself walking more slowly than necessary, reluctant to end their forced partnership. Zephyr, she said as they reached the corridor junction where they would separate to return to their individual quarters. What happens now? I mean, after the council makes their decision? If they approve our research for full-scale testing, we will likely be assigned to continue working together, he replied. If they reject it, we will return to our respective duties. There was something careful about the way he phrased it, as if he were avoiding saying what he really thought. Sarah realized that she was doing the same thing, dancing around the real question she wanted to ask. And if we do continue working together, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Will things go back to the way they were before? Separate quarters, formal protocols, professional distance? Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his multifaceted eyes studying her face with that unsettling intensity. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual, the harmonics creating something almost musical. Do you want things to go back to the way they were? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was quite ready to address directly. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, and she was certain that Zephyr's enhanced senses could detect her body's response. I don't know, she said honestly. Everything I was taught about command protocol says that getting personally involved with colleagues is a mistake. But I've never felt more effective as a researcher or as a leader than I have these past few days. Working with you, trusting you, letting down my professional barriers just enough to accept help, it made me better at my job, not worse. Zephyr nodded slowly, as if her words confirmed something he had already suspected. My people have a saying, strength shared is strength multiplied. It is considered a military philosophy, but perhaps it applies to other forms of collaboration as well. Sarah felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Are you suggesting that sharing a sleeping platform improved our research capabilities? I am suggesting that trust and vulnerability are not weaknesses to be hidden, but tools to be used wisely, Zephyr replied. And I am suggesting that what we have built together, this partnership, this friendship, is worth preserving, regardless of what the Council decides. The word friendship felt both adequate and completely insufficient to describe what had developed between them. Sarah knew that she cared about Zephyr in ways that went beyond professional respect, and she suspected that he felt the same way. But neither of them was quite ready to put those feelings into words. Whatever happens, she said, I'm glad we were assigned to work together. I've learned more about myself and about what humans can achieve when we work with other species than I ever thought possible. The learning has been mutual, Zephyr replied, and there was something in his harmonized voice that made her believe he meant it. They stood at the corridor junction for another moment, neither quite ready to return to their separate lives. Then, the station's communication system crackled to life with an announcement that normal quarters were now available and all personnel should return to standard accommodations. I guess that's our cue, Sarah said reluctantly. Indeed. Zephyr paused, then added, sleep well, Sarah. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, whatever the Council decides. As she watched him walk away down the corridor, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed over the past 3 days. She was still Commander Chen, still bound by protocols and responsibilities. But she was also someone who had learned to accept help, to trust a colleague completely, and to find strength in vulnerability. The regulations hadn't changed, but perhaps her understanding of when to follow them and when to question them had evolved. Maybe that was what made humans valuable to the galaxy, not just their analytical capabilities or their technological innovations, but their ability to forge connections that transcended species barriers and official protocols. As she made her way to her newly restored quarters, Sarah found herself hoping that whatever the Council decided, she would have more opportunities to explore what human-alien partnerships could achieve when built on trust, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. The message from Council Prime arrived 18 hours later, delivered through official channels with all the ceremonial weight that galactic bureaucracy could muster. Sarah read it 3 times before she fully processed what it meant. The Galactic Research Council had not only approved their research for full-scale testing, they had fast-tracked it for immediate implementation. Their quantum field resonance discovery was being classified as a Category 1 breakthrough, putting it in the same class as the discovery of faster-than-light travel itself and the invention of artificial gravity. More importantly for Sarah personally, the Council had specifically requested that the Human-Corathan Research Partnership continue, with full funding and expanded authority to recruit additional team members from across the galaxy. She was still staring at the message when her door chimed. Come in, she called, expecting to see her aide with additional paperwork or logistics updates. Instead, Zephyr stepped into her quarters, his multifaceted eyes immediately finding hers across the room. His expression was difficult to read, Corathan emotional displays were subtle compared to human ones, but she thought she detected satisfaction and something else she couldn't quite identify. You received the Council's decision, he asked, his harmonized voice carrying those impossible resonances that she had grown to find comforting rather than alien. Just finished reading it for the third time, Sarah replied, setting down her datapad and turning to face him fully. I can barely believe it. Not only did they approve the research, they're giving us resources I didn't even dare to ask for. Zephyr nodded, moving into the room with that fluid grace that made him seem to glide rather than walk. The implications were too significant for them to ignore. When properly implemented, this technology will reshape galactic civilization. When properly implemented, Sarah echoed. That's the key phrase, isn't it? The Council is betting everything on our ability to turn theoretical physics into practical technology. Do you have doubts about our success? The question was simple, but Sarah could hear deeper meaning in it. He wasn't just asking about their research capabilities, he was asking if she trusted their partnership enough to take on a challenge that would affect the entire galaxy. No, she said, and was surprised by how certain she sounded. 3 days ago, I might have had doubts. But, after seeing how well we work together, how our different perspectives complement each other. No, I don't have doubts. Zephyr's multifaceted eyes seemed to brighten, though it might have been a trick of the light. Good. Because there is something else you should know about the Council's decision. He moved to her workstation and activated a holographic display showing the organizational structure for their expanded research team. Sarah studied it, noting the impressive array of species and specializations they would be working with. This is incredible, she said. Crystalline engineers, Vorthan physicists, even energy beings from the Stellar Collective. How did you convince them to assign resources like this? I did not, Zephyr replied. The assignments were made based on the recommendation of Council Prime personally. It seems that our presentation convinced them that interspecies collaboration produces superior results. Sarah looked at him more closely, noting something in his posture that suggested he wasn't telling her everything. Zephyr, what aren't you saying? He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns in the air around the holographic display. When he spoke, his voice carried a formality that she recognized as his way of broaching difficult topics. The Council's decision was not unanimous. There was significant opposition, particularly from the hegemony delegation. Dr. Vex argued that our research was too dangerous to pursue and that human-Corathan collaboration was inherently unstable. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Politics had always been the bane of scientific research, but she had hoped that the potential benefits of their discovery would override petty species prejudices. What changed their minds? Council Prime intervened personally, Zephyr said. They argued that our partnership represented a new model for galactic research, one that could bridge the gaps between species that have been isolated by cultural differences for millennia. He paused, manipulating the holographic display to show additional details about their new assignments. But there is more. Council Prime has designated our project as a test case. If we succeed, it will open the door for similar collaborative efforts throughout the galaxy. If we fail, it sets back interspecies cooperation for decades, Sarah finished. No pressure at all. There is always pressure, Zephyr replied, echoing his words from days earlier. But we have already proven that we can succeed under difficult circumstances. Sarah found herself thinking about the past few days, the cramped emergency shelter, the awkward sleeping arrangements that had somehow led to deeper trust and more effective collaboration. In retrospect, it felt like a test run for the challenges they would face going forward. There's something else, isn't there, she said, reading the subtle tension in Zephyr's posture. Something you're not sure how to tell me. Zephyr's multifaceted eyes fixed on hers with that unsettling intensity. The Council has made an unusual decision about our working arrangements. Given the success of our close collaboration during the emergency, they have authorized us to continue sharing quarters if we choose to do so. Sarah felt her face flush. They what? The official reasoning is that maintaining close proximity will facilitate rapid communication and collaborative problem-solving, Zephyr continued, his voice carefully neutral. The unofficial reasoning is that Council Prime observed our interaction patterns during the presentation and concluded that our partnership benefits from reduced formal barriers. So they're basically saying that sharing a bed made us better scientists? Sarah said, and immediately regretted the blunt phrasing. They are saying that trust and vulnerability enhance collaborative effectiveness, Zephyr corrected gently. The specific arrangements are left to our discretion. Sarah stared at the holographic display, her mind racing through the implications. On one level, it made perfect sense, they had indeed worked more effectively together after breaking down some of the formal barriers between them. But, on another level, it felt like the council was pushing them toward a level of intimacy that she wasn't sure she was ready for. "What do you think?" she asked finally. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his alien features revealing nothing of his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual, the harmonics creating something almost musical. "I think that the past 3 days have been the most scientifically productive of my career. I think that working with you has challenged assumptions I did not even realize I held about interspecies collaboration. And I think that whatever personal complications might arise from continued close quarters are outweighed by the potential benefits to our research and to galactic civilization as a whole." It was a logical, measured response that somehow managed to avoid answering her real question. Sarah realized that she was going to have to be more direct if she wanted to understand how he really felt about the situation. "That's very diplomatic," she said. "But what do you want, personally? Not as a scientist or a representative of your species, but as Zephyr?" The use of his name without any formal titles seemed to surprise him. His multifaceted eyes widened slightly, and, for a moment, she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath his composed exterior. "I want to continue working with you," he said simply. "In whatever capacity allows us to be most effective. If that means sharing quarters, then I am willing to accept whatever complications might arise. If it means maintaining formal distance, I will respect that choice as well." Sarah felt a surge of affection for him, for his honesty, for his willingness to put their work ahead of personal preferences, for the careful way he was trying not to pressure her into anything she wasn't ready for. "You're being very careful not to influence my decision," she said. "Because it must be your decision," Zephyr replied. "Human social dynamics are different from Corathan ones. What feels natural and comfortable to me might feel inappropriate or overwhelming to you. I do not want our personal arrangements to compromise our professional effectiveness." Sarah found herself smiling at his concern. Here was this brilliant, powerful alien warrior scientist, worried that he might make her uncomfortable by wanting to share living space. It was endearingly thoughtful and completely in character for him. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course. How do Corathans normally handle attraction between colleagues?" The word attraction hung in the air between them, finally, giving voice to the tension that had been building for weeks. Zephyr's eyes seemed to shift color slightly, though it might have been a reflection of the holographic display. "Corathans do not typically experience attraction in the same way humans do," he said carefully. "Our partnerships are usually based on complementary analytical capabilities and shared strategic objectives. Emotional bonds are considered secondary to practical considerations." "But?" Sarah prompted, sensing there was more. "But working with you has been educational," he said, using the same word he had employed earlier. "I find myself experiencing responses that do not fit standard Corathan psychological patterns. Interest that goes beyond professional respect. Concern for your well-being that exceeds strategic necessity. A desire for your approval that has nothing to do with mission objectives." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. He was describing attraction, but in the analytical terms that his species used to process emotional experiences. It was alien and formal and somehow more touching than any human declaration of feelings could have been. "So when you defended human research methods to Dr. Vex," she said, "that wasn't just professional courtesy." "No," Zephyr admitted. "It was not. And when you insisted on me getting proper sleep, even though it meant crossing species protocols. I was concerned for your health and effectiveness," he said. "But, also, yes, for personal reasons that I did not fully understand at the time." Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. She had been attracted to Zephyr for weeks, drawn to his intelligence and his dry humor and the way he made her feel like an equal partner rather than just another human to be tolerated. But she had assumed that his feelings were purely professional. For what it's worth, she said, the attraction isn't one-sided. I've been trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just professional respect, but it's more than that. Much more. Zephyr's multifaceted eyes seemed to capture and reflect every photon of light in the room, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. This complicates our situation considerably. Does it? Sarah asked. Or does it just make the council's recommendation more relevant? She moved closer to him, noting how his alien features became more pronounced at close range, the subtle patterns in his mercury-tinted skin, the impossible geometry of his eyes, the way his presence seemed to make the air itself more charged with possibility. Sarah, he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way he pronounced her name. If we pursue this, there will be consequences. Political ramifications, professional complications, cultural barriers that neither of us fully understands. There are always consequences to any meaningful choice, Sarah replied, echoing his earlier words back to him. The question is whether we let fear of those consequences prevent us from exploring something that could be extraordinary. She was close enough now to catch his scent, that rain-on-stone smell that had become so familiar over the past few days. Close enough to see the minute details of his alien anatomy, to notice the way his breathing had changed to match her own increased heart rate. We could start with the quarters, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. See how that feels. No pressure, no expectations beyond continuing to work well together. And if it leads to more? Zephyr asked. Sarah grinned, feeling a surge of the reckless courage that humans were known for throughout the galaxy. Then, we'll figure it out as we go. After all, isn't that what humans do best? Adapt to impossible situations and find creative solutions? She reached out slowly, giving him plenty of time to pull away, and touched his hand. His skin was cooler than human normal but surprisingly soft, with a texture that reminded her of smooth stone warmed by sunlight. Besides, she continued, someone once told me that humans excel because we're willing to be vulnerable with each other. That we trust each other in ways other species consider foolish, and that this trust allows us to achieve things no individual could accomplish alone. Zephyr's fingers intertwined with hers, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. His touch was alien but not unpleasant, different enough to be exotic, familiar enough to be comfortable. A wise observation, he said, and she could hear humor in those impossible harmonics. Though I believe the individual who made it was merely reporting research findings rather than offering personal advice. Maybe, Sarah said, stepping even closer. Or maybe he was a brilliant scientist who understood that the best discoveries happen when we're brave enough to explore uncharted territory. The space between them had shrunk to mere inches, and Sarah could feel the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded Zephyr's body, another alien characteristic that should have been off-putting but, instead felt strangely intimate. There is one more thing you should know, Zephyr said softly. If we do this, if we share quarters, if we pursue whatever this is between us, we will be making history. No human and Corathan have ever formed this kind of partnership before. No pressure at all, Sarah said, but she was smiling as she said it. Just the future of interspecies relations riding on our personal choices. Indeed. Sarah studied his alien features, noting the way the light played across his multifaceted eyes, the subtle patterns in his mercury-tinted skin, the impossible beauty of a being evolved under different stars. He was right that they would be making history. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead it felt exhilarating. Well, she said, moving close enough that her breath brushed against the alien architecture of his face, humans have always been pioneers. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather explore uncharted territory with. She stood on her toes and kissed him, a gentle press of lips against the surprisingly soft skin of his cheek. It was chaste, careful, a first tentative step into unknown territory. When she pulled back, Zephyr's multifaceted eyes seemed brighter than before, almost luminous in the artificial lighting of her quarters. Was that appropriate? She asked, suddenly uncertain. It was perfect, he replied, and his harmonized voice carried resonances that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Though I should warn you that Corathan courtship rituals are quite different from human ones. You may find our approach to physical intimacy educational. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the small space. I look forward to learning. After all, isn't that what this partnership is about? Teaching each other new ways of seeing the universe? Among other things, Zephyr agreed, and she was certain she heard affection in those impossible harmonics. They spent the rest of the evening planning their expanded research program, their heads bent close together over holographic displays and mathematical equations. But now their collaboration had a different quality, still professional, still focused on their breakthrough discovery, but with an underlying current of intimacy that made everything feel more vivid, more meaningful. When they finally decided to call it a night, the question of sleeping arrangements hung in the air between them. They had the option now of maintaining separate quarters, of returning to the formal distance that regulations suggested. Instead, Sarah grinned and gestured toward her sleeping platform. "Looks like there's just one bed," she said, moving closer to him with deliberate intent. "I guess we'll have to make do." Zephyr's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been amusement. "A recurring theme in our partnership, it seems." "The best partnerships are built on shared experiences," Sarah replied. "And I can't think of a better foundation for changing the galaxy than trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to explore uncharted territory together." As they settled onto the sleeping platform together, no longer by necessity but by choice, Sarah realized that their breakthrough in quantum field resonance had been only the beginning. They were pioneering a new kind of collaboration, one that transcended species barriers and official protocols to create something entirely unprecedented. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Faster-than-light travel would revolutionize civilization, opening up new frontiers and bringing isolated worlds into contact for the first time. But, perhaps more importantly, the partnership between a human commander and a Corathan scientist was proving that the barriers between species were not insurmountable. Other researchers would study their data, their methodologies, their results. But Sarah knew that their real discovery wasn't about quantum fields or energy resonance, it was about the power of trust, the strength that came from vulnerability, and the extraordinary things that became possible when beings from different worlds chose to believe in each other. As she drifted off to sleep next to her alien partner, colleague, and whatever else Zephyr was becoming to her, Sarah Chin smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, political complications, and the enormous responsibility of reshaping galactic civilization. But tonight, she was exactly where she wanted to be, exploring uncharted territory with someone who understood that the best discoveries happened when you were brave enough to trust, vulnerable enough to care, and human enough to believe that impossible things were just opportunities waiting to be seized. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers and possibilities beyond imagination. But, with Zephyr beside her, Sarah was ready to explore it all.